Hey, I'm ZSH Plays. Welcome back to Bellemont Zoo, where today we're going to be adding one of the most charismatic zoo animals in the world, just next to our ocelot aviary here, with a waterfall for otters. I love otters. I've seen them in pretty much every zoo I've ever been to, and I never fail to enjoy seeing them. They're just so much fun to watch and so engaging. Doesn't matter which species it is, I've seen most of them, although not all of them, maybe one day. And seeing as this is, by my reckoning, maybe the 6th otter habitat we've built on this channel, I want to make sure that this is the best one we've ever built. And the way we're going to do that is by taking the best bits of all of my favourite otter habitats and combining them all together. We're going to take some of the designs from the otter habitats at Zoo Leipzig, some of the landscaping from Zoo Leipzig and Prague Zoo, an improved version of the viewing from London Zoo, and as much as possible of the sheer size of the giant otter habitat at Yorkshire Wildlife Park, and try and make the best otter habitat we've ever built. We're using the transport trick here to get some smooth terrain in for the paths, because the way the habitat is going to work is that if you're coming from the direction where you can see the beginning of the track there, then the first thing that the guests are going to have is a view of the otters above the water and on land, and then as they progress, the water is going to get deeper and they're going to be able to see the otters swimming around underwater before finally arriving at another viewing area that allows them to see them over land. And then something that I've taken from the Tiergarten Schönbrunn in Vienna is a double path. So at their South American habitat, which funnily enough doesn't actually have otters in it, there are two paths, one right up next to the glass of the habitat that gives you an underwater view, and then one directly behind and above it that gives you a panoramic view of the whole habitat. And I want to incorporate that as well. So on this one side of the habitat, there are 3 distinct viewing areas and then a long path with a panoramic view of the entire habitat so that people can always get the best view of the otters. This habitat is right next to our ocelot aviary. And we're going to turn this into a little mini area in the zoo called Ocelots and Otters. So we need to join them together and tie this all in and make it look really nice. And we're going to use a mixture of live bamboo, bamboo stalks, and then foliage as well to place throughout this area, join up all the paths and make it feel like its own little hidden area in the zoo that is exclusively for the otters and the ocelot. So we're just going to make one nice bit of foliage, and then we can use this to join all the paths together, cover up any little bits of terrain that are left over after the paths, and just generally make this area feel like a cohesive whole. When we built the ocelot aviary, I had no idea where to put it. It was just a building I'd always wanted to have in the zoo, and with no flying birds, the ocelot seemed to be the perfect animal to add to it. I placed it here in a blank spot, and now we get to fit it in with the rest of the zoo. And there we go, that's starting to look nice. Let's finish up the paths. The main thing we need to achieve here is to realistically join the upper path onto the lower path. So we're going to do that with a retaining wall. So we're going to make a big section of stacked rocks like this using these natural rocks and a bit of foliage and stuff like that as well, till we get something that looks nice. And then we can just place variations of this all the way down the terrain that you can see here to join the lower path onto the upper path. Just need to make one of these, and by rotating it and placing it in different positions, we can get something that looks nice and varied down the length of the path. And once we filled it in with those, we're going to take some of the smaller rocks from the retaining walls that we built for the forest and add those in as well for variety. And we're going to end up with something that looks pretty simple but really nice. You don't really want this to be a focal point. It's not something to distract people's attention. It just makes the separation between the upper and the lower paths make sense. And there we go. Looks much more realistic now with the retaining wall in. We've got one more thing to do, and then we can move on to building the actual habitat. As always with Planet Zoo, the glass barriers with the water in and the paths do not join together because of the distance you need to have between paths and water. We're going to fill in the gaps with some of these Indonesian temple bricks, and when you're down at guest level, they fit together seamlessly. With that done, we can move on to the habitat and start getting the differing water levels in. So we need 2 different water levels here. We're going to join it together with a waterfall. We've got 2 different heights of glass to enable us to put the water levels in where we need them. And then we've got one piece of glass joining the 2 that we can get super low that will be covered up with the waterfall that we build later. Now we're going to build the walls. So we've used a lot of different mud and rock walls throughout this zoo, but I want to build some new ones today. These are inspired by the otter habitat in Gondwanaland at Zoo Leipzig. We're going to use some upside down tree trunks and then some of the tree roots as well. We'll mix the tree roots in to kind of join up the tree trunks and get some really interesting textures in. Love this upside down tree root. You can see how it just adds some kind of gnarly different variations to the texture. It stops it looking like 3 tree trunks stuck together. We use a few temple pieces in the bottom as well. And then once we've got those in the right place, there's a decal in there as well. We're going to drop in another tree root at the bottom just to thicken up the base a little bit. Once we recolor that, we're going to have a really nice looking mud wall. And as usual, we'll create a variation of that, and then we'll use those two variations next to each other to create the entire wall. We'll move this new one next to the old one, and then we'll start alternating these down the back of the habitat. And if we take a look at it, there we go. That's a really natural looking mud wall there. Pleased with that. Let's move on and make the waterfall. We're going to use the piece that we just made along with many others to create a waterfall. And what I want this to do is to enable the otters to actually use it, so they can get from the upper pool across the waterfall and then into the lower pool, as well as walking across the grass that's there as well. So we got lots of different movement opportunities for these otters, and we get to see them gambling around the whole habitat. So we'll get one of the waterfall pieces in. I went through so many different variations of this. What I wanted to do was just use the special effects pieces so that we could control exactly how the waterfall looked. But the problem is the particle effects on them start so far below the actual special effects piece. It would have required about 100 special effects pieces floating in midair above the waterfall, and I just couldn't find a way to cover them up. So in the end, I decided to go with the actual waterfall pieces. We'll use 2 of those, and then we'll use a load of rocks and foliage to cover those up. So at the end of it, you can't actually see the waterfall pieces. All you can see is the water itself, and then we'll have a few special effects pieces creating a little waterfall going down that back mud wall that you can see there. This, I think, is my favourite part of this habitat. It's really effective when it's done, and the fact that the otters can actually use it, which you'll see in the end cinematics, really adds something to it. I think when it's finished, this is the most complex waterfall that we've built on the channel. This is the penultimate habitat in the zoo, so we really want to get this right. We're going all out with every different special effects piece I can think of to make this water look realistic. There's the special effects piece floating in midair. We'll cover that up with some ponytail palms, and there we go. There is our waterfall. Looking forward to seeing our otters gambling about in it. Let's move on and take care of the rest of this lower part of the habitat. So we're going to use a modified version of those wall pieces to create the sides for this part of the water. We'll copy that all around here, and then we will sink the terrain down so that in this half of the habitat it's just above the lower level of the water, and then we can leave it higher in the rest of the habitat so it matches up with the other pool. And doing that enables us to just drop these rock walls down a little bit more as well, anything to show off some more of that beautiful city backdrop. And then we'll put a slope in so the otters can more easily get into the water from this part here. And I want to highlight this area here using a mix of all my favourite things that I've seen in otter habitats, primarily drawing from the habitats at Zoo Leipzig and Prague, with some logs and some mossy rocks and some bracken and a few other things, so that the part where they are most likely to enter the water looks really attractive. And while we do that, let's talk about what's coming up for Bellemont Zoo. There are 3 things that we need to complete this zoo. Firstly, the zoo's final habitat, which is a habitat for a type of animal which I think all great zoos need, and I was lucky enough to see one of them in the wild recently. We are going to be going all out for that habitat, and that will be coming up on the channel in a couple of weeks' time. But next week, we need to build something which the zoo's management would probably say is the single most important thing in the zoo, a gift shop. And as well as that, we need to build an exit, because at the moment, the guests have got no way to get out other than walking back through the entrance. So we're going to be taking care of both of those next week, and it won't just be a gift shop, because I've got an idea to incorporate an animal into it as well. So make sure you tune in next week to see that. Then it'll be the final habitat, and then the grand tour of the zoo. Back to the build, the landscaping above ground is looking good. We need to move on to below the water. We're going to line the bottom of the pools with some mud panels, which we will recolor to look more like concrete. They've got a really nice texture to them. And then I want to add in a little touch, which I saw in the river otter habitat at Prague Zoo, which was a little platform tied to the bank with some rope. I'm assuming they put food on here for the otters to swim around and either get up onto the platform or knock off the platform to eat, depending on what the food is. So we're going to build that here with a piece of wood from the Twilight Pack and then some of the rope pieces. And what we're going to do is actually tie it onto the bank. We use some rope knots, some of the small rough rope piece, and some of the little kind of hooks from the America's Animal Pack, and get this looking as close as possible to real life. It's only a tiny little detail, but I really want to get this right. Things like this are why going to real zoos, or at the very least looking at Zoo Chat and websites like that where you can see real habitats, are so important for making good Planet Zoo builds, because you see things that you would just never think to to do if you hadn't seen them IRL. We've got various platform floats and things like that in the game, but the idea of just having a little wooden platform floating in the water tied to the bank by a bit of rope that the zoo can put food on, it just would never occur to me to put into an otter habitat until I saw this at Prague Zoo. Things like this enable us to take the realism of the habitat to the next level. And speaking of realism, I realised as I was building it that this is right next to the waterfall, so it's going to have a current of water pushing against it, so we need to actually change the angle of the rope and the platform to make it look like it's actually being pushed by the water coming out of the waterfall. And now we're going to add some food. So one of the things that zoo animals often get fed is called kibble, or it is in the UK anyway. I'm not sure if that's an international term, but kibble is kind of like almost like biscuits full of vitamins and nutrients customized for each species, and the little rope pieces, if you recolor them, do a really good job of simulating that. So we'll cover this little platform with those, and then we'll move on to finishing off the rest of the habitat. We're going to place a mud bath for the otters, and as always cover that up with the terrain, and then we'll also put some ferns and creosote bushes around this edge just to make it look nice and natural. I'm not sure I've ever seen otters use a mud bath, but they do have, or giant otters do at least, I saw this at Yorkshire Wildlife Park, they do use communal toilets, or create and then use communal toilets, I suppose, which is pretty amusing to watch. That behaviour is not simulated in Planet Zoo. And then we'll add the finishing touches to underwater using some of our root arrangements from our aquatic building kit. We originally built this for the giant otter habitat in San Bernardino Zoo, and it's still one of my favourite bits of kind of generic scenery that we've ever built. Always just makes natural looking underwater area look so much better. So we'll have those in both sides of the pool, and then we'll move on to a little building for the otters. Now, from what I've seen of them, giant otters are very hardy animals. I've seen them kept indoors in tropical temperatures that you might expect for a South American animal at Zoo Leipzig, and I've seen them kept outdoors in the north of England at Yorkshire Wildlife Park, and they seem to thrive in pretty much any temperature you can throw at them, so they won't be spending too much time indoors. We don't need any kind of guest viewing in here, but they will need some kind of house for particularly inclement weather. Maybe there could be a little mini pool in here where they can teach the baby otters how to swim. They have that at Yorkshire Wildlife Park. They do a lot of breeding of the giant otters there, and I was lucky enough to see them actually teaching one of their little pups how to swim on one of my visits. In fact, if you've not seen it, I would highly recommend my tour of the Yorkshire Wildlife Park over on the ZSH Zoo Tours channel. It might not have the biggest budget of a zoo in the UK or indeed anywhere, but the enormous habitats they have enable you to see some amazing animal behaviours that you don't often get to see in zoos. This building is going to be really simple. It is pretty much entirely hidden away by the rock walls that we built, and without any guest viewing, we don't need to go crazy with it. We're just going to wood panel a basic breeze block building and have that at the back of the habitat peeking out so that we know that there's somewhere the otters can go, even if we don't spend much time looking at it. Alright, it's time for the finishing touches to the habitat. First off, the decals. So we're going to put some moss decals on the floor of both the pools, and then we'll also add some moss decals to the posts. This is the kind of place that moss and detritus would gather in a habitat. Just makes it look more realistic if we have that in there. And then we'll add some final touches to the foliage in the habitat, maybe a custard apple tree, some giant rhubarb, a few roots on the rock walls of the waterfall. The strangler fig roots are so good for just adding a little bit of detail and a bit of texture. A little feeding tray on the waterfall just to give the otters another reason to come up here. And then finally, some extra pathing to create this last viewing area for the guests, where if the otters are up on this bit of ground here before they get into the water, we've got another view of them. And that's the habitat built. Let's take a look. I don't think I've ever seen the guests put their arms around each other. That's really cute, but that's not important right now. What's important is the otter habitat, and here it is. I think we've used this long space down the zoo's boundary next to the ocelot really nicely here. And just look at this view of them swimming around underwater. It's so cool. I originally planned this for Asian small-clawed otters, but when I realised how big it was, I realised the giant otters would be a better fit. And I'm happy with that because they're so much more visible from back here. I've seen people say they think giant otters look scary, but personally I think they are absolutely adorable. Aside from the obvious choice of the Asian small-clawed otters, I think they are my favourite otters. They have so much personality, and so often in zoos I found myself just standing at their habitat for like half an hour just watching what they do, and I'm very happy that we finally have them in Bellemont Zoo. This is where we started today, and this is where we are now. There are just 2 spots left in the zoo to fill. Next week is all about the infrastructure, but we will definitely be squeezing an animal in as well. Thank you so much for watching as always. Thank you especially to those of you who've joined the Explorers Club. Hit the join button on the channel if you want to see your name up here, and I'll see you next week for some more Planet Zoo. Bye.